Hello, hello.
Super Happy Death House 64.
Yeah, that's right.
All right.
Flipping a bit.
Here with David Weekly. Welcome. So I'm hanging out with you here. This is your house, yeah?
This is my house.
It's
Yeah.
a beautiful house. It's
Thank
really
you.
amazing. We're here in Redwood City. So I'm just going to do a quick little interview. I just want to give a little background, just for the folks that don't know who you are. So obviously, there's a lot of people here outside, a lot more folks inside. How did this all come together?
Yeah. So way back when, it was on the order of, gosh, the first dev house was almost 20 years ago. Um, I had a fun party house that I was renting with a bunch of other guys, and we decided on a whim to call it Super Happy Fun House.
Yes.
And we had a bunch of parties, and those parties got very large, and we eventually got shut down. And we were thinking about what we could do
What
next.
year was this?
This would have been 2003, 2004 kind of era. Yep. And 2005 was our first dev house. So 2003, 2004, we threw a bunch of these crazy, crazy parties.
Okay.
And
When you say we, who was we? Like,
yeah, so
what
there
were
were,
you doing back then? Like, why did you even put this together?
yeah, so I was working for a startup called there.com that was working on the metaverse.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I was just leaving that to go start my first company, PBWiki. What ended up becoming PBWiki, and I was working on that. And so I was spending a lot of time when I was working on that first startup, just by myself, and I really wanted to bring people together. So I got together with a bunch of other young men who wanted to throw big fun parties, and we've had to look at a huge number of houses before we found one that was willing to rent to us. And we found this one house, 2735 Sky Farm Drive in Hillsborough. Had a beautiful pool with a fountain that actually had colored lights projecting underneath it.
How many
So
people were there?
there were five of us who were splitting the rent there.
Who were the five?
So there was myself, there was Juan Bruce, there was Chris Countryman, there was Alan Kiefer, and there was I'm blank Andy Radin. Those were the five of us who were there at a super happy fun house. And we put a huge amount of work into these parties. They were like really curated productions. Like all five of us worked really hard on putting these together. So we actually broke Evite because Evite didn't support as many people as we wanted to invite to these. So we had to write our own system, which we called Super Happy Fun Invite. We would have DJs come, and three different DJs played three different sets. We had bartenders come and produce. There was a industrial freezer that we had converted into a photo booth. That would then project pictures inside. We had a dance cage custom constructed. We had an industrial strength fog machine. And we'd have different themes for each of the different parties.
And this is 2005?
Yeah, and this would have been 2005 era. Yeah.
Okay.
So one of my tasks was I was the liaison for the Hillsborough Police Department. So we would call them the morning of the party and let them know that we were going to have the party, give them our number, right? We'd go around to each of the different neighbors and give them some cookies and a little paper that explained what we were doing, give them our contact information, like just to get ahead of it. Because what the cops were concerned about in Hillsborough was teenagers throwing big parties when their parents were out of town. Mm-hmm. And so to get the message right up that, no, these are adults, these are not minors. And we're being responsible. We're giving them our contact information. That immediately just set a clear tone and tempo.
Way ahead of it. That's good.
Yeah. So I actually ended up buying this house that we're in here from the realtor that is the wife of the Hillsborough Police Department Night Watch Commander. So it's like everything in Silicon Valley is fewer people than you think. But anyhow, by the time we got to the ninth one of these, we had like about 400 people coming over, and the SWAT team got called, and the police
You
department.
had SWAT call them?
Yeah, the police department. Well, they were on alert, and the police department and the fire team had basically cordoned off the 2 blocks around our house.
Oh no! Oh no!
So the chief of police of the Hillsborough Police Department wrote a letter to our landlord that said like these parties need to stop. So we're like, well, shoot, what do we do?
This video, we should insert dramatic music.
Yeah,
Dun, dun, dun.
that's right. So we're thinking like, well, what do we do? And one of the other things that I had been doing at the same time was I had created a nonprofit called the California Community Co-location Project to help other nonprofits get internet hosting. Okay. So we had about 130 different nonprofits that we provided internet service to out of Fremont.
What year was this?
That started in 2001.
Okay.
And so that was ongoing. And one of our clients there was a server from a bunch of kids, honestly, who were in Los Gatos who liked to throw LAN parties together, and they wanted to have a hosted server. And they called themselves LG LAN, for Los Gatos LAN Party. And one of the admins on that box found out through me about my Super Happy Funhouse parties, had been coming to the parties, and then heard when we shut them down. So as we were figuring out what to do next, because the parties got shut down, we started doing movie nights on Wednesday nights. Okay. Because I had gotten this projector, and my friend Alan had subscribed to this new DVD rental service called Netflix. Oh, yes. And so we would just have people over to go like watch a movie together. And so Jeff Lindsay came to one of these movie nights, and afterwards he was like, I think we should do a LAN party here, but instead of playing video games, we should develop things. We should build software. So we'll dev instead of LAN, and we'll do it at Super Happy Funhouse. So we should call it Super Happy Dev House. And I was like, intriguing. I was like, all right, I'll be honest. I'd like to rewrite history and say like, and I immediately gave him a high five and said, let's do it. I was pretty skeptical. I was like, a party where people program? I was like, why don't you write this up in a little bit more detail, right? So share with me your thoughts. So we had a second meeting to go talk about a bit more about it. And I was like, you know what? Let's do this as an experiment, because I love experiments. So we did that first Super Happy Dev House in 2005. And Termy, Andy Shin, went and told a couple people about it. And Chris Messina, who's a designer, later on the inventor of the hashtag, went and did a early poster for us, and we had like about, I want to say like 12 people in my living room.
In the first Super Happy Dev.
Yeah. So it's just like a dozen people, and it just no. So this was at Super Happy Funhouse location, which was in Hillsborough. Okay. Yeah. So this was back in 2005. And it was just a lot of fun. I was working on a project, and I kind of hit a stopping point around 1 in, and I was like, I had 2 beers and 1 Red Bull, so I was like kind of amped and like unfiltered, and I was like, let's work on the next project. So I had a project on my whiteboard, just an idea for a thing that I called PB Wiki, to make it as easy to make a wiki as making a peanut butter sandwich. And I started coding it at 1 in, and then I had something basically working by 8 in and passed out. And then I basically didn't even look at the server logs or anything like that the next day. But like Monday morning, I went and looked at the logs, and I saw that 1,000 groups had signed up for PB Wiki. And by the end of that week, I actually had more traffic to PBWiki than I did for the main thing I'd been working on for my company for the prior year and a half. Mm-hmm. So I decided at that point, okay, I need to take this thing seriously. Grew it up from there. And meanwhile, DevHouse was so much fun. We were like, we should do this again. And we had done the Super Happy Funhouse parties once every 6 weeks. So we decided we'd do the same thing with DevHouse. And so we did Super Happy DevHouse, every 6 weeks. And then similarly, weird analogy, in the same way that Super Happy Funhouse party number 9 was the last one because it was just too big. By the time I got to Super Happy Dev House number 9, it got so big that my roommates, who are very into parties and not very much into programming parties, told me I needed to start having these things in other places. Okay. So we started rotating different locations. The 10th one we had at France Telecom's offices in South San Francisco, and it was all weekend long. It was SHDHX. It was not fun. People did not want to spend their weekend in an office park, right? In a cubicle settings, right? And so
so that's interesting, because that's why I'm for me, this is quite unusual. You know, I'm showing up to your house.
Yeah.
You know, this is what is Super Happy
Th-
Dev
this
House.
is this is the core of it. Yeah. So one of the places that we started rotating into was Tom Harrison, who became like really a pillar of the community and was always responsible for our internet connection quality. So whenever the internet would go down at a dev house, people would yell out, "Tom, the internet's down!" But Tom's parents had a brilliant place down Los Gatos, and Tom was one of the main organizers for LG LAN, to go all the way back to the original part. And Tom's parents, amazingly sweet human beings, had this really nice property down Los Gatos with a huge pool. And that's where probably some of the most epic dev houses happened, where people would do lightning talks and there'd be people in the pool like splashing around as people delivered lectures on like the future of cryptography, and like it was really pretty magical.
Did it get easier to put these together, or
we a little bit of both. So I think the part that became easier was we built real muscle on how to do it. If you do a thing every 6 weeks, by the time you've done it like your fifth or sixth time, like you know the full checklist, you know how to walk through it. And we had a core ops team of people who knew how to help and had their own role to play in it. What happened was that things really scaled up. We ended up getting dev houses that were hundreds and hundreds of people, and that became just really exhausting for people. And so we ended up burning out a bunch of volunteers. And at some point, they became too big to throw. So our biggest one was in Palo Alto. We took over 2 blocks of downtown Palo Alto, had about 2,000 people there.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so we were...
So from 200 people, from hosting around 150 to 200 people, to now 2,000.
And the first dev house was like 12 people, right? So,
wow.
So yeah. And we had another one that was in the Tech Museum in San Jose, and we had probably about like 400, 500 people at that one, I want to say.
Wow.
Maybe even more than that. We took over the whole thing. And it was just like, it was a lot of fun, but it was also a lot of work to put on. And the whole thing was just being done as a labor of love, volunteer effort. So
something happened in 2008 where you kind of just snapped and everything transitioned over to now a global expansion with Super Happy Dev House. This is where you start tapping into other nations, right?
Yeah, and that was... Other people did it themselves. This was not something like where we did an expansion. I don't think that would be a fair representation of what happened. What happened was people came here to Silicon Valley and they drop into Dev House and be like, this is so unusual. This is just like not anything like what I've seen before. This is awesome. This is exciting. I want to see if I can do this back in my hometown. And so they'd go back to Germany, to New Zealand, to Arizona, and to Mexico to go and throw dev houses in those places. In Mexico in particular, it really exploded. And I think that was due to 2 people in particular. There was Santiago Zavala and Cesar Salazar. And actually, Santiago's dad is here, Jorge. The whole Zavala family came to my wedding
like
cool. 10 years ago.
I don't know if you can see him on camera, but he's right in the back.
Yeah, you can probably hear him behind, So yeah, the 2 of them were really responsible for driving dev house across Mexico. So there ended up being like 50 dev houses in Mexico City. There were more than a dozen cities across Mexico that had dev houses. So dev house actually became more of a pastime for Mexico than it did for the United States. They've as a country had more dev houses than we have. Just like a fun example of like where culture works well when people beg, borrow, steal, they riff on it, they really make it their own. And that was very satisfying for me to see.
So just to go down the list, we have Coco Dev House in London, Super Happy Dev Club in Cambridge, UK. Yeah, Cologne Dev House, Super Happy Dev Flat, Switzerland, Super Happy Hacker House in Vancouver, Canada, Super Happy Dev House in New Zealand, Phoenix Dev House, Arizona, Boston Dev House, Massachusetts Dev House, Pittsburgh in Pennsylvania, and Hermosillo, Mexico.
Yeah. So just there's been lots of these, which has been fun, and it's also influenced the culture in other ways. So like very early on at Facebook, there were some Facebook engineers who came to a dev house and they came back to Facebook and were like, we should have like a corporate hackathon that's like this. And so Facebook started doing hackathons based on Super Happy Dev House. And then Facebook hackathons ended up influencing a lot of other companies to start doing corporate hackathons. And so now like corporate hackathons are a thing, right?
So it started with Super Happy Dev House.
Yeah, but
cool.
I also think it's not fair if I were to claim like, well, we were the first to do anything like this. If you look predating Super Happy Dev House, even by decades, there was the Homebrew Computer Club here in the 60s and 70s that was exploring what is it possible to do with hobbyist computers. An Apple computer came out of the Homebrew Computer Club. You've got the demo scene that's happened in Norway, Sweden, and Finland, like Assembly, which are these big week-long parties where people write computer code and play video games and like hang out all together. Those things well predated anything that we did with Super Happy Dev House.
So from 2008 with the expansion, which sounds like you don't want to really take credit for that.
Not at all.
A lot of individuals out there that just were influenced by what was here. What happened thereafter? Like what the next 10 years, I guess.
Yeah, so I think that the next big thing that happened for us was around Dev House 25. We were like, you know what? It would be great if we could just have this be continuous. So instead of trying to find places to go and host this, if there was a place where this was happening continuously, a place that could be our home to do this. And that's where Hacker Dojo came from. So
so Super Happy Dev House 25 was where it really...
That's right. So I pitched the crowd. I'm like, we should do a thing called Hacker Dojo, and it should be a 501c3 nonprofit. We should have our own facility. It should be 24/7. And if this sounds interesting to you, hit me up and I'll put you on a chat list, and we're going to start meeting up on Wednesdays to talk about it. And so every week we'd get together at my corporate offices and we'd connect, and we started looking for different places. We started figuring out like how we wanted to incorporate, what our bylaws wanted to be. And we had tremendous involvement from a bunch of core volunteers, Katie Levinson, Brian Klug, Melissa Lynn Perkins, Kit Hodgson, and folks put in time, folks put in money, and we were able to open the first dojo in the fall of that year.
And that lasted how long before like the next big change after that? I want to assume that it's the pandemic. Or was there other big chapters with
Well, so it was interesting because like post Hacker Dojo, it was almost a little bit like a split, because like a bunch of the energy went into standing up Hacker Dojo and iterating there. And then some other folks, continued iterating on Dev House. But I would say that like Dev House got so big and unwieldy and required so much energy that just it did sort of peter out at a point. And we thought about like even do we formally retire it? Do we kill it? And we're like no. Let's let it live on as a thing that people can do. And if there's energy to pick it up in the future, people will do that. So like that was this event here that you see. Like about a week ago, I realized that I was going to be home alone this weekend in our remodeled house, and there's space to host people, and it's like, okay, I should do a Dev House. So reached out to the announce list and pulled people in, and here we are. So
yeah, just randomly happened to just see one of your invites. Like, hey, okay, I'll check it out.
Cool.
Okay,
yeah,
cool. And then the pandemic hit. The pandemic had to take an effect on the Hacker Dojo.
Yeah, so
I want to now focus on Hacker Dojo.
Yeah, sure.
It seems like that's where all the energy's been focused on.
Yeah. So like the chair of Hacker Dojo, Emily Johnson, is here, by the way.
There's a few members here.
Yeah,
from Hacker Dojo.
Yeah, that's right. So the pandemic was hard because we had to close, and it was interesting because I remember that board meeting. It was, I think, in January of 2020, and I said, guys, there's this thing that's happening in China, and it's spreading really quickly, and I don't think the press has really picked up on this in a big way. And if these are not numbers are correct, this is going to be a really big thing. And I want us to start tracking it, and I want us to have a response plan in place that if it gets to a certain level of infectivity and presence, that we take certain mitigating measures, where the highest level of mitigating measures that we shut down because it's not responsible for us to operate. And I felt almost bad for bringing it up because I seemed like a crazy person in January of 2020 to be talking in that way. And the board humored me because like I helped start Hacker Dojo, so it was a little like pat, like, okay, crazy guy, like, but we'll say this respectfully, but like, sure, we'll take a look at a contingency plan. And then by the time things got to the February board meeting, it's like, okay, shit, we do need a contingency plan. And then between the February and the March board meeting, the agreed on contingency plan from the February meeting, every single one of the if this then that, if it gets this bad then that, if it gets this bad then that, had been triggered. And so at the March board meeting, we were looking to get out of our lease, and we were actually the first co-working space to close because of the pandemic, because we knew that we basically were not going to be allowed to operate. And so if we could get out of our lease on the sooner side, just go into hibernation and survival mode, that would increase our odds of long-term success. So that's what we did. And I think because we pulled the trigger so early, we were able to get out of the lease, because the landlord just thought we were crazy. You know, in like early March of 2020, be like, hey, we need to close up shop. Things are really bad. Like, it's like, okay, crazy folks. If we had waited another like 2 months, I think the landlord probably would have fought us for it and like tried to keep us from getting out of the lease, because it would be clear it was more of a broad scale portfolio, not just like the one crazy Chicken Little. So I think we did it great. And we lost a bunch of members. We had people writing us hate mail saying like, you guys are idiots for closing. Like, you're not thinking about your community and what their needs are to go and close. Other spaces are still open. I've dropped my membership with Hacker Dojo and gone over to this other co-working space that's still open because they're willing to serve their members. And you know, we took it on the chin, but it was the responsible thing to do. It was the right call financially. And it then enabled us to be really thoughtful about like, when are we going to go and open back up? We tried during the pandemic to restart as a virtual community. We poked at that. It did, none of it worked.
But that's where I found Hacker Dojo.
Oh, cool.
Connected with the community. I've heard of Hacker Dojo before that, but I've never connected with the community, because I don't think that prior to that there was no like virtual connection, right?
There was definitely not a focus for us. It was like the whole point was to be physically co-present in this space.
That's still the standard now, right? Yeah,
that's right.
So that's actually where I found Hacker Dojo was on all their virtual Zoom meetups.
Maybe it was not a complete waste. That I'm glad we were able to find you.
So Hacker Dojo does have a history of relocating multiple times. I believe this is the fourth. This is
the fourth incarnation. Yeah. We'd like to stay in a place as long as we can. My long-term hope for the dojo, and it has been from day one, is for us to acquire a property and be able to be a permanent institution of Silicon Valley. So if we could own a building and have an endowment that could ensure that this organization could outlive me, and I hope to live a long time, that would be very satisfying. We don't have a path to that yet. We're pretty far away from that, but like that remains a goal.
Why did Hacker Dojo relocate multiple times? That's always
because we had to. You know, so the first time we relocated, it was because the city of Mountain View was going to require us to, among other things, completely fund the installation of sprinkler equipment, which was going to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars that we didn't have. And our landlord wasn't willing to do the work, and we were in a fairly short-term lease. And so the idea of being in I think we had like a year and a half left on our lease, and paying like some substantial fraction of $1 million to gift to our landlord. And it was money that we didn't have. Just like, it didn't make any sense. We had to move. Like the city was going to red tape our door. So thankfully we were able to find a lovely space off of Fairchild that's now actually occupied by Boston Dynamics. Yeah. And the Hacker Dojo 2.0 was great. It was like a big step up, one big contiguous, it was about 16,000 square foot space. So we had some big, amazing events there.
I've been hearing from some of the OGs at Hacker Dojo. They tell me that the bigger feeling is not the best feeling. They like the more...
It's not. But it's good for certain things. It's bad for other things. If you're looking for community, there's a good rule of thumb that says that after about 150 people, you stop being able to really recognize people as your people. So the feeling of a community tends to change once it gets larger than about 150 people, and I think that's right that a large community with many hundreds of members, and we were up to I think like around 400 members at that point in Fairchild. Um, it's you're surrounded by strangers, right? And you can't know 400 people really well, and so there's just sort of a sense of like these are strangers among us, right? And so like your sense of membership to the community is somewhat muted. It's a different dynamic. So I think that's definitely true, and we were large enough in the Fairchild space that resonated as true. The upside of it is that you can have really big events, and you've got this nice n squared scaling property where the number of new connections that people are able to make scales very nicely with events. And so having a big event where you bring a lot of people together is terrific. Being able to host large lectures, workshops, hackathons, things like that was like really cool. So there's pros and cons to it. I think I've come around to like long term, our goal would be more of a cell architecture where we would have lots of smaller dojos, which is part of why like we in our current spot picked a space that was smaller, not only because we get to cash break even more easily, but also because once we got to a place where the current dojo feels full, the hope is then, okay, time to go open another dojo versus time to expand.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Where can the viewers, listeners, know more about Hackadojo and Super Happy Dev House?
Yeah, so Super Happy Dev House is just shdh.org. And then Hacker Dojo, similarly, hackerdojo.org.
Right. How do they get in contact with you if they want to?
David at weekly.org.
David at weekly.org. Thank
you.
Yeah,
thank you. Cool. Cheers.